The morphine was wearing off when she walked in. I know that because I could feel my hip again, that deep, grinding ache that had been my constant companion for the past 2 years. The one my surgeon said meant the joint had been bone on bone. So long it was a miracle I'd still been walking. The surgery had gone well, they told me. 6 hours on the table, a new titanium hip, and 3 days in the recovery wing of Mercy General in Flagstaff. My daughter had been there when I woke up. My son had driven in from Phoenix. They'd sat with me through the fog of the first day, brought me bad coffee from the vending machine, argued gently about whose turn it was to stay the night. My wife had sent flowers. That should have told me everything I needed to know. The arrangement arrived Tuesday morning, white lilies in a glass vase, the kind you send to someone's funeral when you can't be bothered to show up. The card said, "Thinking of you, get well soon." The same thing she'd been saying to me for the better part of a year. Not in words, exactly. In silences. In the empty side of the bed when I'd wake at 3 in the morning. In the way she stopped asking how my hip felt, stopped refilling my coffee, stopped looking at me the way a woman looks at a man she's still in love with. I was 63 years old, and I had learned, over the decades, that people show you who they are if you're patient enough to watch. I had been watching my wife for 8 months. She came through the door on Thursday afternoon, while the physical therapist had just finished our first session, 10 minutes of standing, a few careful steps with a walker, nothing dramatic. I was back in the bed, exhausted in that hollow way that surgery leaves you, when I heard her heels on the linoleum. She was dressed well. That was the first thing I noticed. She'd done her hair, put on the charcoal blazer she saved for occasions she considered important. She was carrying her leather portfolio, the one she used for real estate closings. Not a get-well bag. Not a container of the chicken soup she used to make when either of us was sick. A portfolio. "You look better," she said. She set her purse on the chair by the window without hugging me. "Hip replacement," I said. "Not a spa day." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, looking at the IV line in my arm, the monitoring equipment, the walker parked against the wall. Something moved across her face calculation, I think now, though at the time I tried to tell myself it was concern. "I'm glad the surgery went well," she said. "We need to talk." I had heard those 4 words from her before. Once, 17 years ago, when she told me she wanted us to move from Colorado to Arizona for her mother's health. Once, 9 years ago, when she said she thought we should sell the hardware business and invest in her brother's development company. Both times, I had listened. Both times, I had gone along with what she wanted, because I was the kind of man who believed that a marriage was a long negotiation and that winning every argument wasn't the same as having a good life. I had given her a lot of ground over the years. She reached into the portfolio and set a manila envelope on the blanket across my legs. "I want a divorce," she said. "I've had these prepared for 3 months. I've been waiting for the right time, and I think the right time is now, before you get back on your feet, so we can both move forward cleanly." I looked at the envelope. I looked at her. Outside the window, an afternoon monsoon was building over the San Francisco peaks, the way it does in July in Flagstaff. Dark columns of cloud stacking up over the mountain, like something biblical. "Open it," she said. "My attorney has already reviewed everything. The house goes to me. The rental properties go to me. The investment accounts are split 60-40 in my favor because of what I contributed during the years you were building the business." She paused. "You keep your truck and your tools, and the fishing cabin." The fishing cabin. 11 acres on the rim of Oak Creek Canyon that my father had left me when he died. The only piece of land in the world I'd ever felt fully like myself on. She was giving me back my own inheritance like it was a concession. I picked up the envelope. I opened it. I read through it carefully, or as carefully as a man can read legal documents on painkillers. Though I want to be honest with you, I had already read every word of this agreement 3 weeks ago. I had read it sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, in the copy I'd found saved to the shared cloud account she had forgotten I still had access to. I knew what was in here. I had known what was coming long before she walked through that door. I asked her for a pen. She blinked. Just once, quickly, a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Then she opened her portfolio and handed me a pen without a word. I signed my name on the last page, dated it, handed the papers back to her. "Okay," I said. She stared at me. I think she had prepared herself for an argument. For tears, maybe, or the kind of cold fury she'd probably seen in me once or twice over 41 years of marriage. She had not prepared herself for me lying in a hospital bed the day after learning to walk again, signing her papers like I was approving a grocery list. "That's it?" she said. "That's it," I said. She put the envelope back in the portfolio. She picked up her purse. She stood there for another moment, and I saw her trying to read me the way she had been trying to read me for months, looking for the anger, the confusion, the pain, not finding what she expected. "I'll have my attorney contact yours," she said. "You do that," I said. She left. The lilies on the windowsill smelled like a funeral, and the storm came in over the mountain, and I lay there in the quiet of the room and thought about a phone call I'd made 11 weeks ago. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without what came before. My wife and I had built something over 4 decades, a hardware and building supply business that we'd started with a second mortgage on our first house and a truck I'd bought for $800 that barely made it to the job sites. We worked side by side through the lean years, and there were lean years, the kind that test a marriage the way heat tests metal, that show you whether what you have is solid or just a good-looking surface over something hollow. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who are both now in their 30s. We had a house we'd renovated ourselves, room by room, over 20 years. We had the cabin. We had what I thought was a life built together. What I didn't know, what I started to suspect about 2 years before any of this happened, was that my wife had been conducting a separate financial life alongside the one we shared. It started small. A credit card statement that showed purchases I didn't recognize, for amounts that didn't match anything she'd mentioned. I assumed it was a mistake and let it go. Then a statement from an investment account I hadn't known existed, addressed to her alone, showing a balance just under $100,000. When I asked her about it, she said it was inheritance money from her aunt, which would have been more convincing if I hadn't attended her aunt's funeral 12 years earlier and known that the woman had died with nothing. I let that go too, I'm ashamed to say. I let it go because I was 61 years old and tired, and my hip hurt, and I did not want to have the conversation that would follow if I pulled that thread. But I kept watching. 8 months before the surgery, I found the folder. Not physically, it was on her laptop, which she had left open on the kitchen counter when she stepped outside to take a phone call. I wasn't snooping. I was genuinely looking for a recipe she'd mentioned wanting to try. But the file was there, named with a date and our address, and I opened it because something in me had been waiting for this moment long enough that my hands moved before my brain could argue. It was a plan, a detailed, carefully organized plan. She had been systematically moving assets, not stealing, nothing so crude, moving, transferring joint investment holdings into accounts in her name alone, a little at a time, over a period of roughly 3 years, restructuring the ownership of 2 rental properties through an LLC she'd formed with her sister's name on the paperwork, taking out a home equity line of credit against our house, $240,000, that I had no knowledge of and had never signed for. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after I read that file. Then I made a phone call to an attorney I'd known for 20 years, a man named Gerald who had handled the legal work on every major transaction our business had ever done. I told him what I'd found. I told him I needed to understand what it meant and what I could do about it. I told him I wanted to move carefully and I did not want my wife to know I'd seen any of it. Gerald spent 2 weeks reviewing what I brought him: statements, documents, the screenshots I'd taken of her files, the account records I had legal access to as her husband. At the end of those 2 weeks, he called me and used the word fraud, not as a dramatic flourish, as a legal term specifically applicable to the home equity lines she had taken out using a forged version of my signature on the application. That detail, the forged signature, was the piece I hadn't expected. My wife had forged my name on a bank document to extract nearly $250,000 from the equity in our home. She had done it with enough care that it had gone undetected for 16 months. Gerald said that in Arizona, what she had done constituted wire fraud and forgery at minimum, and potentially a longer list of charges if a prosecutor decided to pursue it. We talked about my options for a long time. I could go to the police immediately. I could file for divorce myself and let the discovery process uncover everything. Or I could wait and see what she did next, document everything thoroughly, and be in the strongest possible position when the moment came. I chose to wait. I scheduled my hip surgery. I had my son and daughter come to visit, and I sat at dinner with my family and watched my wife pour wine and laugh at my son-in-law's jokes and be the woman I had married, or the woman she could still perform when the occasion called for it. And I thought about 41 years, about the truck that barely ran, and the second mortgage, And the years when we both worked so hard we sometimes forgot to talk to each other about what it meant that she had done this. Gerald filed the paperwork I needed 3 weeks before my surgery. He moved quietly, through channels she wouldn't be monitoring, restructuring the assets she hadn't yet touched in ways that were completely legal and completely invisible to her. He documented the forged signature with a forensic document examiner, whose testimony, he told me, would be extremely difficult to challenge. He prepared everything we needed for the moment she made her move. I went into surgery knowing exactly what was coming. I signed her papers in that hospital room because my signature on her divorce agreement on a document that had been prepared without disclosure of the fraudulent home equity loan, without acknowledgement of the assets she had already moved, created a legal event. It started a clock. It triggered the discovery process. And what discovery would find, Gerald had assured me, was a paper trail so clear and so thoroughly documented that her attorney was going to have a very difficult conversation with her very soon. What she thought she was getting when I signed those papers was a clean exit. What she actually got was the beginning of the end of everything she'd spent 3 years building. I spent 11 days in the hospital and the rehabilitation facility before my son brought me home. My wife had already moved most of her personal things out by then. Clothes, jewelry, the artwork she'd always claimed as hers. She'd left the furniture, the kitchen things, the photographs. I stood in the living room on the first evening, on my cane, and looked at the house we had renovated room by room, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not grief, exactly. Something quieter than that. The kind of feeling that comes after a long illness when you finally understand that the sickness was real and you had been pretending it wasn't for longer than you should have. Gerald called me the next morning. Her attorney contacted me, he said. She's been informed about the forensic document review. How did she take it? There was a pause. Her attorney is requesting a meeting. I think the word settlement is going to come up very quickly. It did. Within 10 days, her attorney was sitting across a conference table from Gerald and me, and the man looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. To his credit, he was professional. He laid out what his client was prepared to offer, which had changed substantially from what she'd set out in those papers she'd handed me in the hospital room. The home equity funds were to be returned in full. The rental property LLCs were to be dissolved and the properties returned to joint ownership for proper division. The investment accounts she had moved were to be restored. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue criminal charges through the county attorney's office. I looked at Gerald. He gave me a small nod. "Tell me one thing," I said to her attorney, though I was aware I was really saying it to her through him. Did she know, when she came to that hospital room, that I'd already been to my attorney? Her attorney was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My client believed she was acting within the window of her prepared timeline," which was a careful way of saying no. She had walked into that hospital room thinking she was in control of every variable. She had handed me those papers with the confidence of someone who had planned carefully and seen every angle. She had watched me sign my name and walked out of there believing she had won. She had not seen me coming. Not once, not ever. I thought about that for a long time. About how well I had known her, or thought I had. About how people who share a bed for 4 decades can still be strangers in the ways that matter most. About how I had spent years watching her and reading her and still hadn't fully believed, until I saw it in her own documents, that she was capable of this. I don't think I'll ever stop turning that over. The settlement was finalized on a Wednesday afternoon in September, 4 months after the surgery. I walked into Gerald's office without a cane. My hip still ached at the end of long days, and probably always would to some degree. But I was walking on my own, and the surgeon said I'd eventually forget I'd ever had the operation. The house sold in November jointly, cleanly, with both signatures legitimate and both parties present. I took my half and bought a smaller place on the edge of town, close enough to the rim that on clear mornings I can see the canyon from the back porch. My son helped me move. My daughter came for a weekend and we painted the kitchen together and ordered pizza, and she told me she was sorry about how everything had happened. "I'm not," I told her, and I meant it. Not because I wasn't sad. I was sad. I had been sad for a long time before any of this. I think sad in the particular way of a man who can feel something ending but can't make himself name it out loud. But there is something clarifying about watching a thing end honestly, about not pretending anymore that the ground is solid when you've known for a long time that it isn't. My wife, my ex-wife, did not face criminal charges. That was part of the agreement. I don't know if that was the right decision. Gerald thought it was the cleanest path forward, and I trusted his judgment. And there were mornings in those months when I thought about changing my mind. When I thought about what she had done and felt something sharp and cold move through me that wasn't quite anger but was close enough to it. But I am 63 years old and I have lived long enough to know that spending your remaining years feeding your rage is a choice, and it is not a choice I'm willing to make. The money came back. The properties came back. She has her life now, whatever it looks like, and I have mine. What I have is the cabin. I spent the first real weekend in October out there alone, the way I used to go when the kids were young and I needed a day of silence. The creek was running low after the dry summer, and the cottonwoods along the bank had gone gold, and I sat on the porch in the late afternoon with a cup of coffee and watched the light move down the canyon walls, the way it does in fall, slow, and amber, and unhurried, like the afternoon has nowhere it needs to be. My father built that porch. He built it the summer I turned 15. And I handed him boards and held things level and didn't understand yet that this was one of the most important things that would ever happen to me. That I would remember the smell of fresh-cut pine and the sound of a hammer in the morning quiet for the rest of my life. That someday I would sit in the chair he sat in and look at the canyon he looked at and feel his presence in the wood under my hands. She had offered me back my own inheritance like it was a consolation prize. It is not a consolation prize. It is everything. I want to say one more thing, because I think it's the most honest thing I can offer. When people hear a story like this one, they want it to be about revenge, about the satisfying moment when the plan snapped shut and the person who'd been scheming got what they deserved. And I understand that. I understand the human need for that narrative, the one where the ending is clean and the score is settled and justice looks like what we think justice should look like. But I have to be truthful. The moment I actually remember most is not the settlement conference. It is not the look on her attorney's face when he laid out the new terms. It is not even signing those papers in the hospital room with the knowledge of what I knew. The moment I remember most is sitting in Gerald's parking lot after our first meeting, 11 weeks before the surgery, after he had looked at everything I'd brought him and said the word fraud for the first time. I sat in my truck for about 20 minutes, the truck she was going to let me keep as a concession. I thought about the woman I'd married. I thought about the second mortgage and the lean years and the 2 kids and the house room by room. I thought about what it means to love someone for a long time and then have to look clearly at who they actually are. I thought about how much easier it would have been to close the laptop that night, go to bed, and keep not knowing. I did not cry. I am a 63-year-old man from the high desert of Arizona, and crying in parking lots is not in my repertoire. But I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had been done and what it meant and what was going to happen now. Then I started the truck and drove home. That is what I have to offer as a lesson, if you're looking for one. Not the tactics, not the attorneys and the forensic document examiners and the careful months of preparation. Those were just the practical response to a practical problem. The real thing, the hard thing, the thing I'm still working at is this. You can love someone honestly for a long time, and they can be dishonest in return. And that is not a reflection of your love. It is a reflection of their choices. The two things are separate. Keeping them separate is the work of a lifetime. My hip is better. The cabin is mine. The creek is running. I'm going to be all right.